Aoifinn Devitt. I'm CIO at Moneta, and I am delighted to be hosting this Fireside chat here with Mitesh Sheth, who's recently awarded an MBE for his services to diversity in the financial services sector. Mitesh is a friend of mine. I'm delighted to be sitting down with him for not the first time. He is Chief Investment Officer Multi-Asset in Newton Asset Management and is former CEO of Redington, and obviously has made a massive contribution to issues of diversity and inclusion, which is an area that is very close to my own heart. Welcome, Mitesh. Thanks for joining me here.
It's great to be chatting to you again, Aoifinn. And hi, everyone.
And hi, so I'm taking this call from Preston in Lancashire, and Mitesh is taking the call from his offices in Boston, having arrived off a red-eye flight. So we're going to really bring the global perspective to this discussion. Normally the roles are reversed. We're normally on the opposite continents. But Mitesh, let's kick off by just talking a little bit about your background and how you came to enter the world of investing and why diversity is such an important issue for you.
Yeah, I think it does have a lot to do with my background. So my parents were immigrants into the UK from Africa, from East Africa, and their parents had come from India, from the west coast of India to Africa. I think growing up in the UK, actually, not far from where you are, in Bolton, in Lancashire, we had a lot of family living in one house, kind of growing up in this big extended family, but in not a lot of space. And as we moved down to London and I worked my way through my education, I was good at maths. I had no idea what to do. I could see the big shiny buildings in the city of London, but I didn't know anyone who worked there. I didn't know how to get through, and I was really fortunate that I was on a charity retreat where young people from inner cities and other parts of the UK were taken to the Lake District to kind of build social skills, networking skills, and a number of people from the city and elsewhere were volunteers there. And one particular gentleman who was an actuary at Aon took a real interest in me and talked to me, kind of gave me advice, heard I was good at maths and encouraged me to look into the actuarial profession. He kept in touch with me beyond that walk, and learned that I was really struggling once I'd started down the actuarial route to find a job, to be able to get in the door, to have a CV that looked right, to tick all of the boxes. And very kindly introduced me to his HR team for a summer internship for me to go through the process there. And as kind of the rest was history from there. I was able to go from an internship into a graduate role, and then grow through the organization at Aon. So I think for me, it's really front of mind just how kind of at times insular this industry can be. And how hard it is if you've not had that lived experience for people to kind of understand the challenges of being able to get in. So yeah, diversity and kind of making sure that I guess we're an industry that really prides itself on hiring the best talent, but it's from a limited opportunity set that we're hiring that best talent. So I think we're deluded in thinking that we're really hiring the best talent. And so my real passion isn't just doing the right thing, but it's also a commercial reality in leading and building an investment business or previously consultancies, in making sure that we're really tapping into the various diverse pools of talent and actually recognizing with our eyes open the obstacles they face and even getting into the door, let alone then progressing once we're inside.
Well, let's go back, and we will certainly talk about practical solutions to dealing with this problem of lack of diversity, lack of inclusion. Let's just go back briefly, though, to your own lived experience, which, as you said, is so key. What did you notice when you got to the city in terms of inclusion? Did you feel included? And how did you go about addressing that? Did you have to rely on others, or did you have to kind of take initiative on your own to do something about that?
I recently described my experience and career as feeling like a fish out of water. for much of my career. And I think that's so I guess the quick answer is no, I didn't feel included. And what's really important is it's not because anyone was deliberately excluding me. So I want to say that up front. And I think it's really important to recognize that this isn't about kind of black and white. It's not, I didn't face any overt racism. I didn't face any overt discrimination, but nonetheless, I joined an environment where I felt an outsider. And over time, that feeling like the person at the table or the only one in the room that's different kind of compounds. And it becomes harder and harder to speak up, to challenge, to question, to kind of fulfill your potential with this compound effect of I don't belong here. That you've really got to overcome in your own mind. But it's a shame to have to put all of that on the individual. So to give a couple of examples, I started on the graduate scheme, and I was one of the few people of color in that scheme. But more than that, I didn't drink alcohol. And so a lot of the social integration and networking happened after work at the pub. Which I would go along to, but I didn't feel particularly comfortable. I certainly wasn't the life of the party. And I think beyond that, as people talked about their weekends, as people talked about what they were doing outside of work, it was just very different for me. I was part of a large extended family. I was part of a religious and I kind of had a spiritual life that many others didn't share and didn't inquire about. I hadn't ever been skiing. I still haven't. And most holidays were going back to India to see the family. So you just bite your tongue. You don't share. You don't show your full self. And it was much later that I realized that the impact that had on my confidence and my ability to be able to communicate. Where I was really lucky was I'd read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which was a real kind of a book that played a really key role in my life. I read it at 17, but it reminded me at this stage of between the situation or the circumstance and your reaction is a choice. And I remember in those early days of my career, knowing that I was disadvantaged by not being in the same circles and having the same conversations. And I proactively reached out to senior people in the organizations and tried to have coffees with them and chats with them. Somebody gave me some great tips to say, ask people for advice. People love giving you advice. And that proved to be kind of completely invaluable as I kind of moved on through my career.
I've certainly heard that too. Asking for advice, maybe as opposed to asking for help, can be seen as less needy, less demanding, but also it's implicitly recognizing the wisdom of the person you're asking. So you're actually flattering them in a way as well. So lots of good feedback from that. And I think you said to me before that you went for coffees, maybe because going for a drink wasn't an option always, or didn't have the same effect. So you would find a workaround or go for a coffee. You also did develop ways to build that network.
Exactly. Yeah. Coffees were pretty popular.
Yeah. And you spoke about that people rarely deliberately exclude an individual. And I think, just to put this in the context of investing, we often talk about, well, what are the kind of unintended bets in a portfolio? Like what sort of falls out of what we otherwise do? And I think that not creating the most inclusive environment can often be an unintended fallout or result of the way that we work together. It's very rare that someone would actually intend to exclude, but it would suggest that we have to be intentional about being inclusive too. And I think we've made some strides in that respect in terms of having Diwali festivals and having an LGBT Pride Month where we celebrate our differences. And I know that at Redington you actually make quite a point of doing that. But how else do you think an employer can be intentionally inclusive?
Yeah, this is such an important topic, and let me just take a step back with where you started there. I think being labelled a sexist or a racist or something else is kind of one of the worst things people fear, is being called in a work environment, right? And the fear of that means we don't have safe spaces in which we can talk and have conversations. So actually, inclusion is inclusion for everyone. It's not just inclusion for women or people of color or people from socially disadvantaged backgrounds or otherwise. And we're in an environment where a lot of the workforce, a lot of our employees don't feel included, don't feel comfortable being able to have open conversations. I often remark to people, because I was different, it meant your instinct was to avoid talking about the things that made you uncomfortable. You would avoid talking about the festival that I'd just been celebrating, or where I'd gone to India and what I was doing, or what was going on with my family or otherwise. But actually that just alienates you to not have someone inquire. And it's far worse to have someone kind of just ignore everything that makes you different and the richness that you bring to an organization, because they feel uncomfortable about it and they don't want to stand on a landmine and they don't want to be labeled. And so to answer your question, the number one tip that I would have, it's not just about those events, which are great, but it's about creating an environment where people can be curious, where people don't feel terrified of stepping on a landmine, of stepping on eggshells, and are able to inquire, to say, well, what am I missing? Tell me about your experience. Tell me about how I can better support you to succeed. How does this organization look from your perspective? And I think asking questions rather than making assumptions, because even two people from the same, what would look like background or demographic aren't the same. We're all different. And actually moving to a space of curiosity and asking questions rather than making assumptions is about the most inclusive thing we can do. For someone to take a real interest in you and what makes you tick, is the stuff of magic, right? That's what really lights us up. To really be seen for who we are, is the most fulfilling thing. So, I think there's a lot of other things that can be done and are done, but for me, this is fundamental. And it is about creating a culture where we can do that, which isn't polarized, where people don't feel terrified of saying the wrong thing.
And it seems that there are more eggshells around at the moment, because perhaps there's a danger of someone being clumsy, being politically incorrect, maybe inadvertently saying the wrong thing, maybe being cancelled because they think that they don't have the right to opine on an area that they don't have lived experience of.
Yeah.
Don't we have some grace as well, though, accepting that this is not a comfort zone for everyone? It's actually a comfort zone for very few. That in order to have these conversations, we're going to have to accept that people will say the wrong thing, use the wrong term, perhaps, and not intend to offend, but say something perhaps that it is not quite right. We do have to create that safe space too, don't we?
Yeah, and I think it's on both people. I think it's on the individual, as well as the person they're speaking to be able to come at it with a bit of humility. It's also, I think it's important, though, that it isn't just brush off. It's not just that, hey, I'm always going to make mistakes. This is how I am. This is where what more can you expect? I'm never going to change now. I think that's very different from saying, hey, can you help me with this? And, if I get it wrong, please call me out, because I want to get better. I'm learning. And I think that's all it is. It's if we're going to make any changes here, if we're going to create organizations and environments in which diverse people can not only contribute but can thrive, it needs us to be able to be open to learning. And this really dawned on me when I became CEO at Redington, because for a lot of my career, I'd pointed fingers or criticized or complained about, the senior management or the people in leadership roles. And all of a sudden, I found myself as CEO of the organization. And it was really important to say, I have certain lived experience, but I can't impose them on everybody else. I have to commit to learning and listening, and changing myself. And that's got to be the first step to me trying to change the organization.
That's great. I just wanted to remind people, the audience, that there is a Q&A here on the chat, so please feel free to send any questions you have for Mitesh to me, and I'll be able to address them with him. But before that, Mitesh, let's get into some specifics. And I've got one question which I didn't put on my preparatory script, so I'm going to drop this one now and we can answer it later. Because you're very active on LinkedIn. You recently posted for International Women's Day around some feedback you'd had when you canvassed views within your team. I'd love to ask you maybe a little bit later whether those views, anything surprised you in terms of what you heard, particularly from the female fund managers. But before that, because we have prepared this one, you, I know, have given a lot of thought as to how we can get more female leaders into mid-level and senior roles, and what that's going to take from C-suite management to do that. In particular, we might talk about portfolio managers, getting more females running money across the asset management industry. Can you tell us some of your thoughts and prescription maybe for that?
Yeah, so I think we have seen in the industry that we're in a number of more female applicants into our entry-level roles. I know a lot of organizations have put a lot of effort into that, and not just women, but often women from disadvantaged backgrounds that are being reached out through great organizations like Investment 2020 and others. But where my concerns were that there wasn't as much focus at the mid and senior levels. Again, in particular, there's been a growth in women joining the industry into client-facing roles or even into operational roles. But when we look at fund management, when we look at investing, it's still a very, very small fraction of the workforce of our industry that are women. And so we have to ask the question, what's going wrong here? Why aren't there more women in these roles? And what do we need to do to be able to change that? And all of that can't be done just through graduate recruitment or recruiting out of school. So some of the things that we've learned from and benefited from is looking at returnships. So working with people like the Return Hub. I know Dominique was speaking on one of the sessions earlier today. We partnered with her to be able to reach out to women who'd worked in the industry and or beyond the industry in the kind of wider space, had a period of time out of work, and actually were finding it incredibly difficult to find, to even get through the screens, let alone to then stand out through interview and get through processes, and then still have the challenge of onboarding and readjusting, kind of having had a break. So some real obstacles there that required very deliberate kind of focus from the top to have to shift. So I think that's kind of one thing. But my dream, if we're really going to materially move the dial on having more female fund managers, on having fund managers from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, who bring different perspectives to our organizations, we really need not just the CEOs and leadership teams, not just HR, but we need the lead portfolio managers, the heads of desk, to mentor or even further sponsor somebody who's different to them, somebody who brings real diversity to their desk. And what they'll find is they'll learn and gain a lot. But kind of our industry, fund management, is the classic apprentice model, right? You don't learn it by attending a course or by doing a qualification. You learn it by someone giving you risk to manage, by overseeing and helping you develop that skill set and giving you that safe space to be able to make mistakes and learn. And I think without that, we're not going to materially move the dial on having more diverse portfolio managers in the next 5, 10, and 15 years. So my big wish, my big call is to those running money, those who are in influential roles in fund management, to really take time out to sponsor 1, 2 other individuals within their teams, and or to bring them into their teams from other spaces. To sponsor and develop over the next few years.
We have a question from Maha Phillips around the gender pay gap and what the success you had at Redington to eradicate it. But certainly the news today is that we're not doing well enough at an industry level to eliminate that. And I suppose the gender pay gap is the outcome. But what we're talking about here is addressing perhaps the source of some of this disparity. What advice would you have to organizations who need to do more to address this issue, the gender pay gap?
Yeah, so I mean, the gender pay gap is one important statistic of many, right? But just focusing on that for a minute. What we found was that you've got to look at every part of the pipeline, right? So it is entry-level roles into all parts of the organization. So parts and teams where you've typically just hired women. And looking there to make sure you're bringing in diverse talent all the way through to the senior end, whether that be kind of middle management and executives leading the firm. So I see a lot of effort at the junior level, but not across all of the levels of the organization. I think beyond that, it's then pay and promotions. So again, we make the mistake of thinking, well, this is somebody who is diverse. Let's say it's a female team leader that's managing that pay and promotion process. And I've had instances where that person is actually a real champion for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and yet finds themselves in a position where they're recommending a man for promotion over a woman when actually the woman is better qualified for the promotion. Because we all fall, we are at the end of the day a bundle of habits, and we're part of systems and processes. And we often emulate what we have seen done before without questioning it. And so until someone calls that out, and when it was called out to say, are you putting this guy forward because he's better qualified? And she heard herself saying that, well, no, I just worry that he's going to resign if I don't. And, she's shouting for the role more. But until the question was asked and she was hearing herself speak, did she catch herself to say, what am I doing here? This is the very thing that I fought against and argued against. So we have to create those checks and balances, because it isn't just about people's good intentions. It actually has to be wired into the process. So when it comes to gender pay gap, it's not just about the attracting of talent. It's about actually developing and paying and promoting talent throughout the organization. And there are a lot of bad habits and or processes. Equally, we found our one of our promotion processes to managing director had a bunch of unintentional biases in it, where it rewarded extroverts, or it rewarded people who pushed themselves forward or put their hands up, rather than looking at things in a more balanced way. And until we changed that, we couldn't change actually our ability to be able to promote more women and introverts into managing director roles. So I guess in a nutshell, what I'm saying is that you've got to be really systematic about looking at every part of the organization and put in place processes that don't just rely on people remembering and having good intentions, but actually calls out and checks. So at Redington, we had the HR team, the people team, formally check for diversity and bias at the pay and promotion process, and empowered to challenge managers on their recommendations.
And let's go back to some of those individual experiences that you canvassed, because it does seem that the theory certainly is clear. And I think a prescription that we all could do, and that senior portfolio managers can do to encourage more women both into the pipeline and through that pipeline, is clear. But there often are some sand in the gears, perhaps, that we don't always think about. I've heard, for example, it said recently that it actually used to be better in finance for women 10, 15 years ago, that there was less, maybe there were fewer issues around a man mentoring a woman, that has become an issue in some parts of the world, that it's become more difficult. The childcare has risen in price, and certainly the stress of COVID has placed that as an additional sort of sand in the gear in terms of somebody will have to have their career suffer. And then finally, the hybrid working, which ostensibly should benefit anyone looking for a more flexible arrangement, can actually lead to lower visibility. So even those, so we talked about extroverts versus introverts, the lower visibility for some of these women can actually be a hindrance, regardless of how extrovert or introvert they are. So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear some of the maybe anecdotes that you've come up against, and just thoughts on what we can do about them.
Well, some of the advice. So again, I started here at Newton just 3 weeks ago, and Newton has actually a number of senior mid-level female fund managers across the investment floor. And rather than assuming that I knew their experience either at Newton or in the industry, I just asked them, why do you not feel we have even more female fund managers? What are the obstacles that you face? What advice would you offer me as a new manager in this organization and to others starting out? And some of the things I knew I've come across before. I've engaged a lot with. I engaged a lot with our women's network at Redington. In fact, they were the biggest catalyst to change by holding me accountable and by calling me out when I made mistakes. So they were absolutely key to us making progress there. But there were some things that really stood out to me. So some of the fund managers pointed out to me that as you become older within the workplace, let's say you've been a female fund manager, you've been a fund manager for more than 25 years, there is so much change going on. It's really easy to feel left behind, whether it is by the technology or by the tools and techniques. And that's not just for women, that's for everyone of age. That's not something that had really stood out to me. It's not something I'd come across before. And this real sense of wanting to make sure that we didn't leave people behind as we raced forward in embracing new technology and tools, taking the time to make sure we were taking everybody with us. So that was something that really stood out to me. The other piece that was that was interesting was kind of people on the positive side recognizing that actually before the pandemic, there was this sense that you had to be in all hours, you had to be in before markets opened, you had to stay late into the evening. It was very difficult to balance that with childcare responsibilities, say, unless you had somebody at home who was able to look after that and completely have it under control. But there was a couple of reflections. Firstly, that actually we've all learned and seen that we can do this job virtually and remotely. But also the recognition that a lot of men have, we talk about the great resignation, but a lot of men have reflected on what they want to do in their careers and where they want to work and what they're doing. So I was pleasantly surprised to hear a number of women reflect on the fact that, they had partners at home who were actually choosing to work from home, or who were able to work from home, who were able to share far more in the kind of childcare, domestic, elderly responsibilities than they had before. So yeah, I think it's a real mix. But as I said right at the beginning, no two women are the same, no two men are the same, no two people from the same background are the same. And until you ask questions, you're not going to understand what people's individual kind of issues are and how you're able to try and overcome them. I think otherwise you're just taking a very generic approach to things.
And we've seen a lot of diversity initiatives recently, certainly over the past number of years, since the murder of George Floyd. We've seen many companies take a stand in terms of hiring a more diverse workforce. We've seen from your ex-colleague Devitt, 100 Black interns turn into 10,000 Black interns. Extraordinary initiatives like that. But there is some cynicism sometimes that some companies are just paying lip service, that there's an announcement and then a year later it's like, show me the evidence that something has changed. And as I mentioned, we've been looking at this industry now 30, 40 years, and it's not been a great deal of evidence of change. So What are we doing wrong? Can you see I don't mean more generally. I mean, there must be some initiatives that just don't work. And have you identified like any initiatives that just are well-intentioned but don't work?
Yeah. So two things. Firstly, there are things that just don't work, but also there is changing an organization and is not an easy thing to do, as you and I have both experienced through the various organizations we've worked with or worked for, right? So So, for example, when we started doing returnship programs, let me take a step back from that. With our graduate programs, we were increasingly, over the last decade or so, in organizations I've worked with, bringing in more diverse candidates into graduate roles. But that didn't have a material impact on the diversity in our kind of middle management roles or in senior roles, right? That people aren't necessarily going to stick around or are going to take breaks in their career, may or may not come back from them. So I think a lot of energy and attention goes into that. And I think that's right. But that's just step one of 20, say. And so I think it's fantastic that we absolutely must bring in interns, school leavers, as well as graduates from different backgrounds. But we can't end there, I think is the point. Then we went on and we started to do returnships, and we found that they were really valuable. They weren't the only way of trying to bring in kind of diverse candidates into roles. What we learned, again, this is about the unconscious impact on this. So, for example, we were looking to hire a chair of our board, and we were frustrated that the recruiter was largely only bringing us male CVs. And it wasn't until we spotted that one of the requirements was you had to have been a chair before. And we asked ourselves the hard question, how important is that to have been the chair of a board previously? And we said, well, it's not that important. I mean, you could have been a chair of a committee or whatever else, and having experience of worked with private equity mattered, but less so chairing the board of a company. Removing that one criteria completely changed the diversity of the CVs that we saw. So again, despite being well-intentioned, you've actually got to work your way through to executing and assessing what is it that's getting in the way of us actually making progress here. Example I'll give is that we quite often, despite having the best intentions, we would need to hire someone to hit the ground running, right? And I say hit the ground running is the biggest obstacle to hiring diverse talent. Because what you're really saying is, I want someone who has done it before, and who's in the industry and in all likelihood will look and sound like me, to minimize friction and to just trust to be able to get on with it. Hiring diversely and making it work is about embracing conflict. Not even conflict, discomfort, and that takes time. So that requires planning, and we had to work really hard to move away from just we need this person tomorrow and we need them to hit the ground running, to what are some of the talent gaps and succession gaps we need for the next 3, 4, 5 years. And I think as an industry, we're pretty bad at that. But I think if we were to really prioritize that then gives us the runway to be able to bring in talent and make mistakes. We won't get everyone right, just as we won't in any other role. And we need to give ourselves the space and the runway to be able to test and learn and iterate. And so, I worry that I think there are a lot of really great intentions. I think there's a lot of really great initiatives. But what I'm asking for and what I've found is critical is a real rewiring of an organization. It's about right the way from the top. And the most critical layer is the layer of people managers, the line managers in the organization. They're your real multipliers. And a space where they can acknowledge mistakes, where they can learn, where they can raise objections, but also where things can, we can experiment and test and learn, because we're going into uncharted territory. It's not like we've got this right at some point in the history and we're trying to redo that. If we do what we've always done, we'll get what we've always got, is the maxim, right? And so fundamentally, everything we do needs to change, and we are all complicit in processes and habits and structures that are biased, that are excluding some of the most valuable talent in our organizations, and that requires quite deliberate deconstructing, and that's uncomfortable. So I think embracing discomfort, you can't do DE&I successfully without embracing discomfort. And as human beings, we're not very good at that. So there's a real human issue here.
That's a great. I'd like to build on that a little in terms of embracing the discomfort. Just want to throw out another reminder. We've just under 10 minutes left. If anybody would like to ask any questions, please do put them in the chat. I want to build on your analogy of hitting the ground running, because this is something quite close to my heart. I am a runner. I've just completed my 43rd marathon, so I know all about the long run, the 26.2 miles. I do hit the ground running. I mean, I wouldn't be there if I didn't. So I hit the ground running. I'm doing great for the first half. But I would be nowhere along that race if it wasn't for the people providing food, cheering me on, providing a little bit of sugar. And even if I need it, which thank goodness I haven't, the medical tent at some point, providing the painkiller or the bit of Vaseline or whatever you need. There is no way you can complete that race without your cheerleaders and your supporters. And I think that is something that we're actually missing a little bit in the workplace. And we see this in the college, especially in the universe. First generation college students do tend to have a high dropout rate because they get to the door. But once they get to the door, then the support teams sort of fall away. So what I'd love to ask you is, how can we do better? And I'm thinking of things like coaching circles, executive coaching, not just for the executives, but for everybody along the line, access to role models, and normalizing some of these functions being done by people who look different from each other. Because I do think that we're still kind of getting it wrong.
Every investment organization I have spoken to has the same kind of area for development that they don't prioritize, and that's kind of learning and development and kind of coaching and mentoring for even their most valuable assets, right? Their investment staff who they're relying on to generate alpha or deliver outcomes for clients. But actually learning and development, coaching, mentoring is a bit of an afterthought, and even when offered, not always taken up. Let me bring it closer to home. So for me personally, coming in, actually, if it wasn't for those interventions throughout my career, I would not be where I am today. When I started in my career, I hadn't played many team sports. I hadn't had the internships and experiences. I hadn't had elder members of the family coach me as to here's what work and professional work looks like. So I had more audacity than was typically expected in the workplace. I was driven to be able to, I remember having a pile of debts and wanting to support my parents with their debts and help them buy a house. And so wanting to progress almost relentlessly was a really big driver. And I needed managers and coaches at work to catch me and say, hey, I don't know where this is coming from, but you're steamrolling people. And there's this almost, a relentless desire to say, well, when do I get promoted? When do I get paid more? When is the next step that is ugly, that needs, where's it coming from? And I didn't know that that's not how everybody else was. It was subconscious, right? It was something that I needed to address. So the number of times I'd be referred to as a rough diamond was a lot. but it was instances like this where people took me aside and rather than just ignore me, push me to the side or otherwise, actually sat me down and said, you may not realize this, but here's how you're coming across. Here's something you're going to need to think about and work on, or we need to understand where you're coming from. And beyond that, it was managers who saw things in me that I didn't see. I mean, I still carry an imposter syndrome with me all these years later because I've had years of feeling like I don't belong and I shouldn't be here that I'm having to grapple with. And if it wasn't for David Jacob at Henderson saying, I think you should be head of fixed income, when I was 28 years old and saying, you've got a real gift for managing and developing people and building investment teams. You're not a fund manager, but I think you'd be a great head of fixed income. He saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. Similarly, when I came to Redington and the founders asked me to apply for the CEO job, that was something that I didn't see in myself. I didn't see myself doing or knowing how to do. So you're absolutely right. I would have left the industry multiple times over, and I certainly would not have been pushing the boundaries and doing the things that I'm doing. I certainly had no role models who I could follow and learn from, but I did have mentors, people who took time out and who invested in me as we went along. And so I wholeheartedly support your point that diverse talent, even more so than everyone else, you've got to work at it. And this comes back to my embrace discomfort. It's far more comfortable to get a room full of people who all went to the same school, grew up in the same area, speak the same way. It's going to be easier to have conversations, right? It's going to be easier to get on. It's going to be easier to go for a drink afterwards, and maybe even socialize with your families outside of work. You mix that up with a bunch of people that are completely different. It's much more uncomfortable. Maybe you're not going to socialize in the same way. Maybe you're not going to see eye to eye on everything. That's discomfort. That may even slow down your decision making. That's going to take real work to be able to find the commonality amongst those differences. But if you get that right, it's magic. That's real hard work that we've got to embrace if we're going to make a change here.
I love that. Well, you certainly shared a lot of wisdom here with us already, but I know you mentioned before you are a spiritual person, and you've mentioned some tremendous influences in your life, people, whether it be from family, from your heritage, as well as from the workplace. Have there been any key words of wisdom or a creed or motto that you've lived by, or you've heard that you think is helpful for us?
Yeah, I mean, one of my most important teachers, Bandarang Shastri Attavale, lived his life lifting people out of poverty, and kind of transformed millions of lives over the course of his life. But one of the biggest lessons I learned from him is to build bridges for those that are being left behind. And the way I might express that to those listening today is when you're sitting at a table, ask yourself, who should be at this table that isn't here today? Which voice is missing in this discussion or in this meeting? Even at the table or the virtual table, if you're at one, who's being quiet and why? What perspective do they have? And equally, who is the person that's being disagreeable, but that's being pushed to the corner and not being entertained or given the space to have the debate? Just being able to notice that and build bridges where there is friction, I believe, is the key to being able to create an actually inclusive environment that won't just benefit diverse individuals. It will benefit everybody in the workplace and will allow us to deliver better outcomes to our clients. So it's not just the right thing to do, it's kind of commercially critical. But yeah, that build bridges for those being left behind has been something that's really kind of stitched into me.
Well, that's wonderful. And I'm going to share my own, based on building bridges, and I think this comes back to my marathon analogy. Some of the most inspiring placards that I've seen along the second half, it's always the second half, the inspiration, are things like, you've got this, dig deeper, or the kids who want to do kind of high five. And I think if we can sort of think of ourselves in that role for other people's careers too, just from time to time, kind of assuring them that they've got this, or that they can dig deeper, they can achieve more perhaps. And I think being there, even if it's just a glass of water that they need, I think this is the way that we will see that people are in the race for the long haul. So we're getting close to the time, and I know we have a strict cutoff. So Mitesh, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you here and to share your part of your journey, which is only midway through. And can't wait to see Newton and beyond, and look forward to continuing to share your wisdom.
Thanks, Aoifinn. It's been a real pleasure, and I want to take my hat off to you, to the incredible work that you do, not only in your day job and in your personal life, but the stories that you bring to life through your podcast. I think they've been incredibly inspiring and have brought so many diverse perspectives to all of our attention. I think each of us could do that within our own offices and within our own spaces, to open our eyes to different perspectives. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Mitesh. That was my high five along the marathon. That I didn't mention the 50 Faces podcast. It does have a library of role models, and Mitesh is featured there. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us on this virtual fireside chat. Thank you.
Cheers, everyone. Have a good day.